The Giants had won the first 2 games of this 4-game series with Carlos Rodón and Logan Webb coming up next. They were in a really, really good position to at least win 3 out of 4. They had won 5 straight, but they lost both of those games in very typical 2022 Giants fashion. A blown lead late with the bullpen, and just generally ugly baseball in the finale. So we're going to break it all down next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on this show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts, including YouTube. So check us out there if you have not already. And coming up on today's show, we're going to get into what went wrong these last couple of days. As I mentioned there, the Giants were in excellent position to keep this thing going. They had won 5 in a row. They had won 8 of 10. And they had their co-aces, Carlos Rodón and Logan Webb, going. And yes, you had to face Zach Gallen in one of these 2 games, and he was excellent today. But a blown lead by Dom Leone in a 1-run game, which I don't want to say inexcusable, but you should have scored more against Zach Davies. They were in a position where their bullpen had to be perfect down the stretch there in the last few innings, and that's asking a lot out of this group that has been so much worse than they were last year when they led the majors with, I think, a 2.99 ERA. And this year they're like 26th or something like that. So it has just not at all been the same success out of the pen. And it was Dom Leone last night who gave up a couple of runs, and he's now given up 13 earned runs over his last 12 and 2/3 innings dating back to July 5th. It was actually a blow up against these very same D-backs that started this really difficult stretch for Dom Leone. And yet they're going to him in the 8th inning with a 1-run lead. And I think you could have gone to Camilo Doval. Gabe Kapler said that he thought about it, but that if they're going to do anything this year, they need more than one guy to be trustworthy. And I think that makes sense. But at the same time, I mean, I didn't necessarily think going to Doval there was the right move. But I was kind of wondering where John Brebbia was, although, to be fair, I haven't looked at his pitch, how frequently he had pitched recently. But regardless, they needed Dom Leone to be a good reliever for them. And he was for the first few months of the year, but he just has not been for the last month and a half. So that was ugly. It turned a 1-run lead into a 1-run deficit, and the Giants could not come back in the 9th. And then today, like I said, just very ugly baseball, generally speaking. There was the Brandon Belt bunt, which I think is going to stand out to people the most. People who were there were booing Brandon Belt and the Giants with this effort. It was a 5-0 D-backs lead, and there were 2 guys on with 2 outs and 2 strikes. And Brandon Belt bunted against Zach Gallen, and he bunted it foul, and he was out, and the inning was over, and the boo birds came down. They kind of cut away, so I don't know quite how loud and prolonged the boos were, but Brandon Belt and the Giants got booed there. And I'm just going to say, we're seeing far more 2-strike bunt attempts than ever this season. It's not just the Giants, although they've been one of those teams at the forefront of doing this. So, I kind of am sympathetic to the effort, and there's a reason for it. Because if you look at when hitters are in 2-strike counts, I can't remember if it was 1-2 or 2-2. I believe it was 1-2. If you look up just league average numbers when you're in a 1-2 count, they're horrendous. You're very likely to strike out anyway. And you're just, especially when you're dealing with a guy like Zach Gallen, who has just dominated this game up until that point, and Brandon Belt, who on the previous pitch had just been completely broken down on a swing, on a really nasty cutter. So Belt was basically conceding he had no shot at the plate. And if you're a hitter and you feel like you have no shot, I kind of understand it. But at the same time, I don't think it was the right play. I haven't seen him kind of quote, talk about it after the game, but I would imagine he's going to say it was a mistake as well. Maybe not. I'd be interested to hear what Kapler says. Kepler's probably going to defend Belt, so just be ready for that. But the reason I don't like the play at all is because Brandon Belt has a really good eye, so he could easily coax a walk out of that plate appearance, and then you've loaded the bases that way, and also he has power. And Zach Gallen, while he had really good stuff, he's not a superhuman pitcher. He can hang a curveball, and if he does, Belt should be able to hit a homer and give you 3 runs with one swing of the bat. So I also kind of get, they obviously had left the third base side wide open, and Brandon Belt felt like in his mind he saw that he could just lay one down, reach first base, and maybe even would have brought in a run if he had got it down where he wanted it to. Or even if it doesn't, it's bases loaded for J.D. Davis, who's been swinging a really hot bat. And if he felt like he had no chance and he was setting it up for the next guy. But then why not bunt earlier in the count? I guess the idea is that once you're with 2 strikes, like I said, the results for hitters, that's just the thing we need to keep in mind, is that, yes, there's a huge risk with attempting to bunt, but also, last I had seen, the rate of hits when a bunt has been successfully put into play by the Giants this year is much higher than the rate of hits when you successfully put a normal batted ball into play. So if you keep it fair, it's almost certainly a hit, pretty much, is what I'm saying. So the only risk is that it's foul. Not the only risk, they might get you out otherwise, but it's likely to be a hit. Whereas if you swing the bat, all number of things could go wrong as well. It's not like swinging the bat would have likely led to anything good. And so I'm kind of defending him there. I think it's probably going to be over the top criticism for that. I get it. I just didn't think it was the right situation, given who he is, what the score was, what the situation was, and all that. But it was an ugly look, and the fans are free to boo if they so please, and they did, and it was an ugly game for the Giants. Brandon Crawford earlier in the game had bunted with 2 strikes and bunted it foul and been out. So to me, it's like kind of embarrassing because you're basically just conceding to Zach Gallen. And if you're just saying we have no chance against you, how does that make him feel? It makes him feel like he's invincible. And that's the way he looked today. So it was ugly. And then in the previous game, Mike Yastrzemski, just to pile on to this team for a minute, he came in as a pinch runner and promptly got picked off second base by the pitcher. And then in the 9th inning, may have been his lone plate appearance of the game, grounded into a double play after the leadoff runner got on base. Tommy La Stella, who got on base because he swung at a pitch that was so far out of the strike zone that it became a wild pitch and it kicked away from the catcher. And so I just must kind of grill into La Stella for a minute. He has just not been the guy that he was prior to coming to the Giants. And especially this year. Even last year, he was like very, very selective, which is kind of what we expected. And to me, he kind of pushed more into the passive territory, which is a problem, I think. And it seemed like he would just decide, his passivity or his selectivity was just simply deciding, I'm not going to swing the bat right here. And as opposed to like having really good pitch recognition. I feel like the pitch recognition isn't very good, which is something I didn't really see by just looking at the numbers. It looks like he's super selective. But what I've seen by watching him play all the time is that he seems to be selective in that he just makes it up in his mind he's either swinging or not swinging. I could be wrong, but the rate at which he chases pitches out of the zone for someone who's supposedly so good at not chasing has been alarming. And this year his chase rate is 32%, and at no point in his career prior to this year was it even close to 30%. So last year was 25, the year before that 25, the year before that 26. So we've just seen a big uptick in chasing by La Stella this year, and also the contact has gone down. He was a guy who was up around 90 in 2019 and 2021. In fact, over 90% contact when he swung in 2019 and 2020. And then this year, 84%. So a big fall off in contact and a big increase in chasing. So that's just obviously not going to work. And it's not what they signed up for when they gave him this contract. And also he hasn't been able to play the field much of, at all. He's played a little bit in the field, but not much. And he also can't run very well. So they're just not getting any value out of Tommy La Stella. And he comes in with negative 0.5 Fangraphs wins above replacement. Yastrzemski has been in a deep slump. and is down to a weighted runs created plus of 99, meaning he's been a tick below average offensively. So coming up next, we're going to continue to pile on a little bit and call out some of the bad baseball over the last couple of days and this season at large. But there's also some positives. J.D. Davis continues to be red hot. And they did make that roster move with Luis Gonzalez being optioned. We'll explain the rationale behind that one in just a minute. But first, you're hanging out with some friends. You're putting back a few drinks. A few becomes a few too many. As the evening comes to an end and people start to head out, you think of calling for a ride. But nah, you live nearby. You can make it home okay. It's no big deal. What are the odds you'll get pulled over anyway? And even so, what's the worst that can happen? Your insurance goes up? You lose your license? You lose your job? You total your car? You kill someone? Everyone knows about the risks of driving drunk. The results are tragic and often deadly. However, that still doesn't stop everyone from getting behind the wheel while under the influence. That's why police officers are out there right now looking for impaired drivers on our roads to save lives. So if you think you're okay to drive after a few drinks, think again. Play it safe and plan ahead to get a ride. It only takes one mistake to change your life or someone else's forever. Drive sober or get pulled over. All right, as promised, we're going to pile into the Giants a little bit more. It's warranted these last couple of days. Really, I mean, yesterday could have been a good day. Carlos Rodón was fantastic, and they had a lead. That's the thing, is if you had told me prior to the game, Rodón is going to pitch, 6 innings, 1 run, 11 strikeouts, and they were going to hit 2 homers. Lamont Wade homered and J.D. Davis homered. I would have felt pretty confident that they would win that game. But they didn't, because they were solo homers. There wasn't anyone on base when they hit them. And the bullpen. So that's just in some ways it's kind of unfortunate that when you hit your homers, there was nobody on base. In other ways, they didn't have a ton of guys on base against Zach Davies. But yeah, 2 solo homers and then a bullpen being tasked with trying to go 3 scoreless innings was just too much to overcome. And like I said, Dom Leone hasn't been the same guy. And then, so they wasted this good Rodón start. Logan Webb was not good today. He didn't have any strikeouts. There was an error behind him so a couple of the runs ended up being 5 runs, but only 3 earned, because Joc Pederson didn't catch a pretty somewhat difficult play, but really a play that needs to be made on a line drive. He overran it a little bit, running into the gap in left center. And then there was also another bad throw from the outfield. The Giants are just not good at all at executing this. They're always throwing to the base that's overly aggressive. Like a guy is trying to go first to third. That's exactly what happened here. It was an attempt to go first to third on a single, and Yastrzemski threw to third when they had no shot. Like, you can tell it's a fast runner. I think it was Jake McCarthy, who's unbelievably fast, and Yastrzemski tries to throw him out at third. We've seen this over and over and over this season. Longoria, there wasn't a cutoff guy there, which I don't know where he was, but Longoria has to kind of come get the ball because he knows that the runner is going to be safe at third, and so he's trying to come get the ball, shorten the distance it has to travel so he can grab it and throw to second, because the hitter runner has attempted to take second because you've made this ill-advised throw to third. And so Longoria goes up to get it, throws to second, and the runner is safe. And so we have just seen this far too many times. And I don't know if it's a coaching issue or if it's just that the Giants outfielders are overly aggressive. Part of what stands out about it to me is that the Diamondbacks and a lot of other teams have players capable of taking an extra base. And so, I mean, the runner, I think it was their catcher. So he's not the fastest guy on the team. But if that was Jake McCarthy or pretty much any of these other, Dalton Varsho, or any of these other fast, athletic, Alec Thomas, Diamondbacks players, they're all taking that base. And maybe Yastrzemski doesn't do it if it's not the catcher. Maybe he pre-planned he could do it because it was Carson Kelly running, I believe. But regardless, he still made it. And it really stands out because the Giants cannot take extra bases. And one of the early plays in this game that's not going to get a lot of attention was Evan Longoria leading off an inning early. I think it was scoreless at this point. Hits a ball down the left field line. And to even an average runner in the game, that's a double. It was down the line. The outfielder had not a super long way to go, but he had to go far to his right to get to the ball, and it wasn't hit crazy hard, and so it took some time to get there. And a normal runner, even a slightly below average runner, I would say, makes it to second base there with a double. But given that Evan Longoria and many other Giants players, like specifically Longoria and Belt, they just can't really run because they've dealt with these chronic injuries. And they shouldn't be running full speed or like pushing it to the point where they get injured, because we've seen multiple times with each of them that if they push their bodies in this way, they are liable to blow something out and miss time. And it's more valuable to the team. They don't want them to try to do that. They think that they're willing to sacrifice these extra bases that don't get taken because it'll keep them on the field. But so Longoria is at first instead of second, and then Brandon Belt is up next, and he hit a ground ball up the middle that turned into a double play. But if Longoria had been on second base, he probably would have, if he had, again, maybe not actual Evan Longoria, but even just an average runner, would have been able to get to third base. And so it would have been one of these productive outs. And then you're looking at a runner on third, less than 2 out situation. And again, if you're a faster runner, then you can score in a lot of different ways. But the unathleticness of the San Francisco Giants, just especially when they've played the Arizona Diamondbacks, has just been extremely stark and obvious. And it's a problem. And so the good news, I guess, if you can call it that, it's not good for 2022, but looking forward to 2023, they're going to have the option of making a change here and doing something about this, because pretty much everybody besides, on the offensive side, the only players who are guaranteed contracts for 2023 among their position player group are Brandon Crawford, Tommy La Stella. That's it. Brandon Crawford and Tommy La Stella are the only 2 players who are guaranteed contracts for 2023. Does that mean they're the only ones who will be back? Not at all. There are a ton of guys who are like pre-arbitration eligible or arbitration eligible. They'll be cheap and easy to bring back. Like, I don't want to alarm anyone. Like J.D. Davis can come back, Slater, Yastrzemski, Lamont Wade, Tyro Estrada, Luis Gonzalez. There's a club option for Evan Longoria. But specifically looking at Brandon Belt, Evan Longoria, Joc Pederson, these are some of the guys who, in theory, like give you some kind of value, and they do. Specifically, Pederson with his bat against right-handed pitching, even though he's been in a funk, hasn't hit a homer in like 2 months, he's still overall been a net positive offensively against right-handed pitching. Brandon Belt, that's the thing, is we were going to talk about Brandon Belt's numbers. On the season, just a 102 weighted runs created plus, league average offensively, and he can't really move all that well. It's just been a bad season for Brandon Belt, bad and hurt. And bad by his standards. He's been okay offensively, but hurt and can't run and has taken a step back defensively because he can't move very well. And Evan Longoria, he's been pretty solid in a lot of ways, but just the inability to take these extra bases and the inability to stay on the field, and if he pushes himself at all, is a problem. And it's age related. They're all older, but they can move on. Like I said, Brandon Crawford, Tommy La Stella. It's not like you're thrilled that those 2 are definitely back next year. No offense. Crawford is a Giants legend, obviously, but he's taken a step back. He did just hit the walk-off home run a couple days ago, but you don't feel great about the Tommy La Stella guaranteed deal. But for both of them, next year is the last year of their deal. But I just have to say, like, they can move on and make some changes in these areas if they so desire. So it'll be very interesting to see what they do, especially given some recent comments by Farhan Zaidi that I'm going to get to in just a minute. He basically hinted at the possibility that many of these guys could actually be back next year, even though they don't have to be. So we'll get into what he said and whether it's a good idea momentarily. But first, are you struggling with a bloated belly, uncomfortable digestive issues, or feeling tired and sluggish? There's a good chance you might have an overworked liver thanks to diets high in processed foods and exposure to thousands of harmful toxins. The solution: you need to cleanse and gently detoxify your liver. That's where Liver Health Formula from Pure Health Research can help. Liver Health Formula combines 8 powerful nutrients such as turmeric, beet, and artichoke extract to gently detoxify your liver, restore comfortable and regular digestion, reduce belly bloat, and fill your days with renewed energy. As a listener of our show, you can try Liver Health Formula risk-free today and get a free bottle of Curb Fit with your order. Curb Fit is a safe and all-natural appetite suppressant, making it easy to say no to naughty foods. This makes a perfect complement to Liver Health Formula. Go to getliverhelp.com/MLB to learn more. Again, that's getliverhelp.com/MLB to try Liver Health Formula completely risk-free and claim your free bottle of Curb Fit with your order. Go to getliverhelp.com/MLB to get started. All right, as promised, we are going to talk about these comments by Farhan Zaidi that I've been meaning to mention. I honestly can't remember exactly where I read them or heard them. I think it was in The Athletic, maybe. I can't remember, to be honest. May have been actually Susan Slusser of the Chronicle. But regardless, the comments he made were essentially that there were players on the team that basically it was up to them to determine when they wanted to stop playing for the team. And this caught my eye in a negative way because he basically said, like what I just said, that there are legacy players who have spent their whole careers here and they're going to be able to keep coming back as long as they want. And I mean, Crawford is under contract for one more year, so obviously that takes care of his situation. But I was thinking, it kind of sounded like, and actually the conversation steered towards Evan Longoria as well, and how the Giants hold a club option over Evan Longoria for next year. And it is a $13 million club option, which might right off the bat sound like way too much, and it is. But when you consider the fact that it has a $5 million buyout, it becomes actually just an $8 million decision. And so I wouldn't be shocked if the Giants actually pick that up, even though I think fans are kind of justified in not enjoying some of the style of baseball they see from Evan Longoria at times when we're talking about the fact that he can't stay on the field for a full season and that he has not been able to move well. But for Brandon Belt, he is signed this year for $18.4 million, which actually seemed like a pretty solid deal, given that it's a one-year deal. You're always going to get more on a shorter-term deal, given how good he was over the last couple of partial seasons. Coming into this year, just looking at the last couple of years, he was as good as anybody offensively when he was on the field. He wasn't always on the field, but when he was on the field, he was a monster. This year, he's been on the field quite a bit, and he just has not been able to recapture that form at all. And I would imagine a lot of it probably has to do with his age. He is 34 years old. I guess it's not that old relative to some guys, but the idea that Brandon Belt should just be able to keep being on the Giants indefinitely and that they don't need to come up with some kind of more future-oriented solution at this position is alarming in a way. At the same time, I have always been a Belt defender and I recognize his value. And if he's healthy and producing, I think they should bring him back. But I have serious questions about whether or not Brandon Belt should be brought back for next year. It depends on the contract entirely. And he's played so poorly that he's in line for a much smaller contract coming into this year. And so if it's a much smaller contract, then it might make more sense. It would be easier to move on from it. He wouldn't have to play an everyday role. They could pivot to something else if it doesn't work out. When it's $18.4 million, you feel a different sense of obligation to he has to produce. But if they bring back, Crawford is already back. Evan Longoria, if they choose to bring back Longoria on that club option and they also re-sign Belt, I just am not sure that that's the best direction of this team. And I'm pretty sure that 90+% of you listening right now would agree with me. So that's just something I wanted to throw out there. Those comments struck me. The last point I want to make is about the fact that the Giants optioned Luis Gonzalez, which we saw coming simply because they had been rolling with 14 position players and 12 pitchers, and specifically 12 pitchers being a problem. This bullpen has had problems as it is, and if you start overworking them when you could have an extra arm and you don't have that extra arm, it can have a ripple effect. And then you're about to go to Coors Field, and Gonzalez has been in a deep slump. And so they have never, for a sustained period of time, gone with less than 13 pitchers. And so it was obvious that coming up at some point, they were going to make a move there, and Zach Littell was getting ready to come back. And so it was the obvious move was to bring back Littell and make a corresponding move withdrawing or taking away a position player from the active roster. And so the choice was to option Luis Gonzalez. They didn't have many other choices. The only other non-catcher position players who could have been optioned were Yastrzemski, Slater, and J.D. Davis. So you're not optioning J.D. Davis, who's been great offensively, hit another home run yesterday, 4 since the Giants picked him up. Slater is still good in his lane, which is good defender, good runner, good against left-handed pitching, and Yastrzemski, I guess, was actually a possibility. But it's not like, I mean, if Gonzalez was doing well, I think they very well may have optioned Mike Yastrzemski because he's also been in a deep slump. And if they need a space for somebody else, which they don't, but if they did, like, he's probably the guy who would make sense to be the next to go. But as it is now, there's nobody forcing the issue, and so Yastrzemski stays. But the performance has been that bad where you could arguably justify optioning Mike Yastrzemski. But for now, it's Gonzalez. And the other key point to note is that rosters expand from 26 to 28 in September. So this could just be a 2-week situation. Let him get his swing back. And if he plays well over the next couple weeks in Sacramento, then he could very well be back in 2 weeks. And so certainly not the last we've seen of Luis Gonzalez. This is his last option year, meaning they won't be able to do this next year. Similar to Lamont Wade last year. Wade was up and down a few times last year. This year, out of options. So Gonzalez is going to be out of options next year. So it's going to be a make or break year for him entering the next one. Anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen today. Now make your second listen the Locked On MLB podcast. MLB expert Paul Francis Sullivan brings humor, passion, and unique perspective on every team and the biggest stories around the league. Follow the #1 daily league-wide podcast, Locked On MLB, on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. It helps me out a lot, so thanks in advance, and thanks to everyone who's done so already. Coming up tomorrow, another mailbag episode. We put out a prompt on Twitter. We're going to put one out at about 7 p.m. tonight, so look out for that if you want to ask a question. Anyway, thanks again for listening. You are now Locked On Giants.